A confession has surfaced, not speculation, not a tip passed through a whisper chain. A direct, spoken, on-record confession, allegedly tied to the vanishing of Lily and Jack Sullivan. And the second that news detonated across the internet, two camps formed instantly. One side screaming, "It's over, they got them." The other side asking the question nobody wants to sit with, "Is this real?" Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. I have spent years inside the architecture of real criminal investigations. I have watched cases crack open, and I have watched cases get buried under the weight of bad information. And the one lesson that never changes, the one truth that holds in every missing person's case, every homicide, every disappearance that grips a community, a confession is not a conclusion. It is a complication. Anyone can say the words, "I did it," but saying them and meaning them are two entirely different things. The real question, the question that separates a breakthrough from a distraction, is whether the person behind those words actually knows what they're talking about. Do they know the precise window when Lily and Jack disappeared? Do they know what was happening inside the house in the final hours before those children vanished? Do they know the details that were never, not once, released to the public? Because if they don't, if their story is stitched together entirely from news coverage and social media threads, then what we have is not a confession. What we have is theater. And theater, in a missing children's case, is not just useless. It is dangerous. People confess to crimes they never committed more often than most people realize. Some break under the suffocating pressure of a long interrogation. Some are mentally unwell, inserting themselves into high-profile cases because the attention fills something hollow inside them. Some confess out of guilt, not because they harmed the children, but because they feel they failed to protect them. And then there is the most chilling category of all, the strategic confession. Someone who steps forward deliberately, calculatedly, to buy time, to shield the person who actually did this, to poison the investigation at exactly the moment it was getting close. That last possibility is the one that should keep every person following this case wide awake tonight. So no, we are not here to celebrate. We are not here to pop champagne over a headline. We are here to do what the moment demands. Dissect this confession word by word, layer by layer, and hold every single claim up against the cold, unforgiving light of what we already know. And what we know is this. Lily and Jack Sullivan were last seen publicly on May 1st, in what appeared to be a completely unremarkable afternoon with their family. The following morning, May 2nd at 10:01 a.m., a missing persons report was filed. Every question in this case lives inside that gap. Every answer, real or manufactured, has to fit inside that window. And now, someone is claiming they have a story that does exactly that. But here is where I need you to think critically instead of emotionally. The details a real perpetrator provides are not the details that make headlines. They are hyperspecific. They are the kind of information that makes an investigator's pen stop moving mid-sentence, because nobody outside of that room should know that. The layout of a specific space, a phrase that was spoken, a sequence of events that has never once been reported anywhere. A liar gives you the outline. A truth teller gives you the texture. That distinction is everything. So as we move through this confession, I need every single person watching to hold on to that standard. Don't ask yourself whether the story sounds believable. Ask yourself whether it sounds verifiable. Because Lily and Jack are not a story. They are two children who have not come home. And until they do, every confession, every single one, is a question mark, not a period. Stay with me, because we are only just beginning to pull this apart. Someone stepped forward, not anonymously, not through a third party or a carefully worded statement filtered through an attorney. An actual person, in what sources describe as a direct admission during questioning, has reportedly confessed to involvement in the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan. And according to accounts emerging from multiple directions, this was not vague. This was not, "I may have seen something." This individual allegedly described movements, locations, voices, interactions, and reportedly said the words out loud. "Yes, I was there," for a public that has been agonizing over this case for months. Those three words land like a thunderclap. The instinct is immediate and completely human. Finally, someone cracked. The silence is broken. We are one step away from bringing those children home. But I need you to slow down, because that instinct, as human as it is, can be weaponized. And in cases involving missing children, it has been weaponized before. When the news broke, online communities fractured along a sharp fault line. One group erupted in relief. They pointed to this confession as the breakthrough that changes everything. Proof that the walls were closing in and someone blinked first. The other group hit pause and started asking the harder questions. Why now? What took so long? Is this person actually telling the truth, or are they telling a story someone else wrote for them? That second group deserves to be taken seriously, because the history of high-profile missing children cases is littered with confessions that collapse the moment investigators actually tested them. People who describe crimes in convincing detail. Detail pulled entirely from media coverage, from comment sections, from YouTube videos exactly like this one. People who sounded credible on the surface and fell completely apart under cross-examination. And people who confess with full deliberate intention to mislead, to redirect, to protect someone far more dangerous than themselves. So the very first thing investigators will do, the very first thing, is not celebrate, it is measure. They will take every single claim in this confession and place it directly against the established timeline, like a transparency over a map, looking for the places where the lines match and the places where they don't. Here's the framework that matters. We know Lily and Jack were seen on the afternoon of May 1st. We know the missing persons report hit the system at 10:01 a.m. on May 2nd. Between those two fixed points, everything happened. Whatever was done to those children, whatever decisions were made, whatever conversations took place, and whatever routes were traveled, all of it occurred inside that window. So the confession must answer to that window. Did this person claim to have been present before nightfall on May 1st? Do they account for the pizza shop trip? Do they know about the fence that Daniel claimed he was working on? Do they know, and this detail matters enormously, about the school attendance records flagged at 6:17 a.m. the morning of May 2nd? Because that timestamp, 6:17 a.m., was not something splashed across every news segment. That is the kind of granular, procedural detail that only someone genuinely inside the situation would carry in their memory. If the confessor references it unprompted, that demands serious attention. If they don't know it exists, that tells investigators something equally important. The same principle applies to the physical details that have surfaced throughout this investigation. The wooden bridge, the metallic star sticker, trail camera positioning. These are the touchstones, the markers that separate someone who was actually there from someone who simply watched too many update videos and started filling in the blanks with imagination. Real perpetrators slip up. They remember too much. They remember the wrong things. They correct themselves mid-sentence in ways that reveal genuine knowledge of a scene they weren't supposed to. Describe that precisely. Fabricators repeat the narrative. They give you the version of events that already exists publicly, dressed up with just enough personal color to sound original. The difference between those two kinds of confession is the difference between a lead that saves two lives and a distraction that costs investigators weeks they cannot afford to lose. This is not a moment for hope without scrutiny. This is a moment for both, held in the same hand at the same time, because Lily and Jack deserve nothing less than the truth. And right now, the truth is still being tested. Let's talk about why people confess. Because understanding the psychology behind an admission, especially in a case this charged, this public, this emotionally explosive, is just as important as understanding the words themselves. Most people operate under a comforting assumption. They believe that confession is a product of conscience. That at some point, the weight of what a person has done becomes too heavy to carry, and they crack under pressure of their own guilt, walk into a room, and tell the truth. That happens. It is real. But it is far from the only reason people confess. And in missing children cases specifically, it may not even be the most common reason. Consider interrogation pressure first. Law enforcement questioning is not a conversation. It is a structured, calculated, psychologically intense experience designed to extract information from people who do not want to give it. Hours inside a small room, the same question cycling back repeatedly from different angles. Isolation from family, from attorneys, from any voice that offers reassurance. In that environment, some people confess not because they're guilty, but because confession feels like the only exit door available. They say what they believe the investigators want to hear, simply to make the experience stop. And then they are trapped inside a statement they cannot walk back without looking guilty of lying on top of everything else. That scenario is not rare. It is documented extensively across decades of wrongful conviction research, and it is absolutely relevant here. Then there is the psychological phenomenon of self-insertion. In cases that saturate media coverage, cases that generate daily YouTube updates, Twitter threads, neighborhood vigils, Facebook groups with tens of thousands of members, certain individuals with particular psychological profiles begin to blur the line between observer and participant. They absorb details from coverage. They replay narratives until those narratives feel personal. And eventually, they step forward with a confession that sounds textured and specific because it is built from hundreds of hours of consumed content rather than actual experience. These individuals are not always lying maliciously. Some genuinely believe, on some level, that they are connected to what happened. That makes them more convincing in the room and more dangerous to the integrity of the investigation. But the category that demands the most urgent attention, the possibility that should make every serious follower of this case deeply uncomfortable, is the strategic confession. This is not confusion. This is not psychological fragility. This is calculation. Someone who steps into frame deliberately, knowing exactly what they are doing, and offers a version of events carefully constructed to redirect suspicion away from the person who actually bears responsibility. They absorb the consequences of being a suspect. They create noise, confusion, conflicting narratives. And while investigators spend precious hours untangling their story, the real perpetrator has time. Time to destroy evidence. Time to create distance. Time to build an alibi that will hold up under scrutiny. In a case where 2 children are still missing, time is not an abstract resource. Every hour that gets swallowed by a false trail is an hour Lily and Jack are further from being found. So the question investigators are asking right now, the question they cannot afford to get wrong, is deceptively simple. Is this person speaking from memory or from media? Are the details they are providing the kind that live exclusively inside genuine experience? Or are they the kind that circulate freely in comment sections and case update videos? And beneath that question sits an even harder one. If this confession is strategic, if it is designed to protect someone, then who is being protected? And what does that person need this time for? Because here's the thing about strategic confessions that makes them so corrosive. They work. Not forever, not ultimately, but in the short term, they absolutely work. They generate headlines. They shift public focus. They force investigators to respond and react and verify and cross-examine. And every hour spent on that process is an hour pulled away from the original path. That is not a side effect. In the most calculated scenarios, that is the entire point. We are not celebrating this confession. We are not dismissing it either. We are holding it to the standard that Lily and Jack deserve, which is the highest possible standard of scrutiny, applied without emotion and without shortcuts. Because somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the comment sections, beyond the confession itself, the truth still exists, and it is waiting to be found. Here's where the real work begins. Because once a confession enters an investigation, law enforcement does not simply accept it and redirect resources based on what was claimed. They test it, systematically, methodically, and with a level of skepticism that would feel brutal to an outside observer, but is absolutely necessary given what is at stake. The testing process follows a specific internal logic, and understanding that logic is essential to understanding whether this confession has any real chance of holding up, or whether it will crumble the moment investigators start applying pressure. The first and most critical measure is the presence of non-public information. This is the gold standard of confession credibility. Did the person describe something that was never reported? Something that exists only in the investigative record? The internal files, the forensic reports, the details deliberately withheld from media briefings precisely because they serve as a verification tool? The layout of a specific room, the exact position of an item at a scene, a phrase spoken during a confrontation that no witness has publicly repeated, a route taken that was never disclosed. If the confessor provides even one piece of information in that category, one detail that cannot have been assembled from public sources, the credibility of their account increases dramatically. Not conclusively, but dramatically. If they cannot, if every single detail they offer maps directly onto information already available through news coverage, social media posts, and community speculation, then what investigators have is not a confession. It is a performance built entirely from a publicly available script. The second measure is locational intelligence. Real confessions, genuine admissions from people who were actually present during a crime, typically include geography, specific places, routes, landmarks. Sometimes they include the location of evidence that was never found or the final destination of a person who never came home. If this confessor can direct investigators to a physical location that produces something, anything, that has not previously been discovered, that transforms the weight of their statement entirely. A buried item, a discarded piece of clothing, a vehicle parked somewhere that matches a detail investigators have been sitting on privately for months. Location is where truth lives. Fabricators describe events. People who were actually there can describe places. The third measure is cross-verification against existing data. Cell phone records, GPS pings, surveillance footage from businesses, traffic cameras, and residential systems along relevant routes. Trail cameras positioned near wooded areas or access points. School records. Every movement this confessor claims to have made on the night of May 1st and the early hours of May 2nd can be tested against data that does not lie, does not misremember, and cannot be coached. If their claim location at 7:30 p.m. on May 1st places them at a specific address, investigators will pull every available data point for that address in that window and either confirm or contradict the claim within hours. This is the architecture of modern investigation, and it is precisely why sophisticated false confessors are so dangerous, because they know that any detail they provide will be tested, so they stay deliberately vague on specifics while sounding emotionally convincing. Vague emotion without verifiable specificity is a red flag, so significant it should stop an investigator mid-sentence. Now, overlay all of this against what we already know about the timeline. The confession allegedly places events in the late afternoon following the children's return from a pizza stop, with a confrontation occurring around 7:30 p.m. on May 1st. That is hours before the school attendance system flagged Lily and Jack absent at 6:17 a.m. the following morning. That gap, from 7:30 p.m. to 6:17 a.m., is approximately 11 hours. 11 hours that are largely unaccounted for in any public narrative. Does this confession fill that gap? Does it explain what happened inside those 11 hours in a way that is specific, verifiable, and consistent with physical evidence that investigators have not released? Or does it describe the early part of the evening in convincing detail, and then go suspiciously quiet about the hours that matter most? Because that silence, if it exists, is as revealing as anything the confessor actually said. A confession is only as powerful as the truth embedded inside it. And right now, the truth is still being excavated. Every detail matters. Every gap matters more. The confession has entered the investigation. But now we must turn our attention to something equally important as what was said, who said it. Because the identity, background, motivation, and timing of the person behind this admission carries as much investigative weight as the words themselves. In cases of this magnitude, the confessor is not just a source of information. They are variable, and variables must be examined from every possible angle before they are trusted with the direction of an entire investigation. Let us start with proximity. Was this individual genuinely connected to the Sullivan family in a way that would place him inside the relevant timeline? Were they a regular presence in the neighborhood, the household, or the social circle of Daniel and Malia? Or are they someone whose connection to this case is thin at best and fabricated at worst? A peripheral figure who absorbed enough detail from coverage to construct a story that sounds credible on the surface, but cannot survive contact with the investigative record? Proximity matters because genuine involvement leaves traces, not just in memory, but in data. Phone records place people in locations. Social media activity creates timestamps. Witnesses remember faces. If this confessor was truly present in any meaningful capacity during the events of May 1st and 2nd, there should be a data trail that corroborates their physical presence, independent of anything they chose to say in that room. If that trail does not exist, investigators have a serious problem on their hands. Then, there is the question of timing. Why now? This is not a rhetorical question. It is one of the most operationally significant questions in the entire case. Months have passed since Lily and Jack disappeared. Months of investigation, media coverage, community pressure, and mounting public scrutiny on the people closest to those children. What changed? What specific circumstance? What shift in the investigative landscape? What internal or external pressure caused this individual to choose this particular moment to come forward? Because timing in a confession is rarely accidental. People who carry genuine guilt for months and finally tend to break in response to a specific trigger, an anniversary, a news development, a conversation that reopens something they have been suppressing. Their emotional state when they confess reflects that journey. The weight of it is visible. The relief is real and messy and does not follow a clean narrative arc. People who confess strategically are different. Their timing is precise. Their emotional presentation is controlled. Their story has a shape that feels almost too coherent because it was constructed rather than remembered. They know what details to include, and more tellingly, they know exactly which details to leave out. That omission pattern is something experienced investigators watch for obsessively, because what a confessor does not say is often more revealing than what they do. If this individual described the afternoon and evening of May 1st in detail, but became suddenly vague about the hours after midnight, that asymmetry demands an explanation. Real memory is imperfect across the entire timeline. Strategic narrative is imperfect only where specificity becomes dangerous. We must also consider the community dimension of this moment, because a confession in a case like this does not exist in a vacuum. It lands inside a town already fractured by grief, already divided by suspicion, already exhausted by months of uncertainty, and it detonates. People who have been holding their breath for an answer lunge toward this confession like it is oxygen. The emotional pull toward closure is so powerful that it can override critical thinking in even the most rational observers. That is exactly the environment in which a strategic confession does its most effective damage. Not in the investigative room, where trained professionals apply scrutiny, but in the court of public opinion, where emotion moves faster than evidence and a compelling story can calcify into assumed truth before a single claim has been verified. Investigators must maintain their discipline in that environment. The public pressure to declare this case solved, to give a grieving community something to hold on to, is immense, and it is a pressure that has derailed investigations before. Cases where the wrong person was convicted because the need for an answer overwhelmed the commitment to finding the right one. Lily and Jack Sullivan deserve better than that. They deserve an investigation that holds its nerve when the noise gets loudest, that refuses to mistake a dramatic confession for a verified truth, that keeps its eyes fixed on the children, not the headlines, not the confession, not the social media reaction, but the two children who have not come home. This confession is a development. It is not a resolution. And the difference between those two things could not possibly matter more. If you've been following this case, now is not the time to exhale. Now is the time to pay closer attention than ever before. We have arrived at the place every investigation eventually reaches, the moment where everything that has been building, every thread that has been pulled, every claim that has been tested, converges into a single urgent question. What does this confession actually mean for Lily and Jack? Not for the narrative, not for the suspects, not for the community or the investigators or the people who have been following every update from the beginning. For the children, two children who were last seen on an ordinary afternoon and have not been seen since. That is the question that must anchor everything that follows. That is the standard against which every development in this case must be measured. If this confession is genuine, if the details hold up under cross-examination, if the location intelligence produces physical evidence, if the non-public information checks out against the investigative record, then the implications are seismic. Everything that has been assumed about this case must be reconsidered from the ground up. The roles of Daniel and Malia, who have existed at the center of public suspicion since the beginning, suddenly shift. Their timelines, their statements, their silences, all of it gets placed inside a completely different frame. A verified confession could mean they were not acting alone. It could mean someone else was a primary actor, and they were secondary, peripheral, or even genuinely unaware of the full scope of what unfolded. It could mean the investigation has been asking the right questions, but directing them at the wrong people. And if that is true, if this confession cracks open a completely new direction, then the path to finding Lily and Jack may have just gotten shorter. But that word, if, carries enormous weight, because the alternative is equally real and far more devastating in its consequences. A false confession in a case this fragile does not simply waste time. It actively destroys it. It redirects search efforts toward locations that hold nothing. It forces investigators to spend weeks untangling a fabricated narrative when every single one of those weeks could have been spent following a lead that actually existed. It gives the real perpetrator, if they are still out there, an operational gift, time, distance, and the cover of a story that is consuming everyone else's attention. In law, the concept of reasonable doubt exists to protect the innocent. In investigation, the concept of verification exists to protect the truth. And the truth, the actual, complete, unmanipulated truth of what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan, has not yet fully surfaced. This confession may be the crack in the wall that finally lets the light in, or maybe another layer of obstruction deliberately placed over a truth that someone desperately needs to stay buried. The investigation will determine which one. But the investigation needs time, resources, and the space to work without being stampeded by public pressure or premature conclusions. That means every person following this case has a responsibility, right now, not to amplify unverified claims, not to treat a confession as a verdict, not to name, target, or condemn anyone whose guilt has not been established through evidence and due process. Because in the chaos that surrounds the high-profile missing children case, individuals have been destroyed by speculation before the facts were ever fully known. What this moment demands is disciplined attention. The kind that stays focused on what matters, the children, without getting intoxicated by the drama of a headline. The kind that asks harder questions instead of accepting easier answers. The kind that remembers, in every moment of this case, that Lily and Jack Sullivan are not a true crime episode. They are real. Their absence is real. The pain of everyone who loves them is real. And somewhere, the truth of what happened to them is real too. It exists. It is waiting. It may be closer now than it has ever been. Or this confession may have pushed it temporarily further out of reach. But it has not disappeared. Truth does not disappear. It accumulates pressure until it breaks through. So keep watching, keep questioning, keep holding every claim to the highest standard. Share what you know, not what you suspect. Speak with evidence, not emotion. And if you are someone sitting on information, real, verifiable, specific information about what happened to those children, understand this clearly. The clock has never stopped. Justice has never stopped. And the moment you choose to come forward with the truth, everything changes. For Lily, for Jack, the truth must come first. It must come now. And it must come from someone who actually knows it. We will not stop until it does.